This is Canute Exploration, your topic in a podcast. You know, we have this sort of a challenge in the workplace on also on social media, and you find that it's create a lot of problem for us, especially in how we communicate with each other and among each other, among ourselves, among persons in the workplace. That sometimes it's frustrating. It's really frustrating, and it perhaps contribute to the attrition rate in some of these organizations. But I have a guest who's gonna talk to us about how we communicate. Communication is important, and he's gonna be talking about the outrage culture. And I want to find out how the outrage culture interacts with cancer culture, the cancer culture thing. And my guest will talk to me about that and more. But I have some questions for him, and I'm sure that I'll be putting him on the spot. But let's see what's happening. I'm going to invite my guest into the mix. Hey, David, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. Canute, how are you?
Yeah, I'm good. Nice to hear that. I'm going to put you on the spot somehow. But look, who's David? Let me hear that first. Who's David?
Yeah. So, first, thanks for having me on the show. So I'm a tech guy. For years, I was in tech, starting, in the early days, even before the internet, and did that for many years. And I worked from starting off as sort of an engineering level, worked through up to management, and ultimately was a tech executive and worked with various startups.
Cool.
And I kind of retired from that space, and now I'm sort of a budding science podcaster, so science communications. So I try to talk about, the social sciences related to outrage, kind of this outrage industry, this outrage media, our outrage culture, and and try to talk to some practitioners and other experts about ways to maybe build some resilience to it, and find ways to maybe interact without the outrage.
Oh, cool, cool.
Deal with it out there anyway, right?
Yeah, because we're going to be talking solutions later on. But I am going to ask you this question. I'm not sure how much you have dealt with outrage during your childhood. What David's childhood was like?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because related to outrage stuff, I guess it's been going on for years, but there's certainly been an increase, in the last, I would say 25, 30 years. Some people say this has been going on for 60 years, but certainly I think there's been a big increase maybe in the last 25 or 30 years. And there's sort of been a stair-step increase in the use of this kind of rhetoric to get us riled up, and to sort of pick sides and demonize the other side and stuff like that. And that's been definitely increasing since my childhood. But, in terms of my childhood, I had a very normal childhood. We were just middle-class family, and trying to get through like everybody else.
Yeah. Interesting. So you didn't give any trouble, David. No, nothing you can remember that you have to get some spanking for, or
Well, I was a pretty rebellious kid at certain times. Like I went through waves, and I'm sure I was a challenge for my parents,
right.
Especially my mom. And I think she was pretty proud of me later when I sort of came out of that phase, and so I think she was also happy. But I'm sure I gave her a lot of gray hairs.
I know, right? A lot of us will do that to our parents. Our children will do it to us as well. But look, what is this outrage culture? It's something I'd like to find out from you before we get into the meat of the matter. What is this?
Yeah, it can mean a lot of different things to different people. One thing I talk about a lot is kind of this idea of this outrage industry, these kind of outrage merchants that are using our emotions against us, basically. So they try to get us fired up. They use, outrage is kind of a proxy for a larger set of emotions, but especially anger, and frustration, and moral outrage is probably a big aspect of it, where they're trying to get us to really, get mad about things, see some moral aspect to it, or see some kind of identity aspect to it, and then get us fired up about it. Sometimes, most times, without giving us the full picture.
Right.
They'll simplify it. So there's a whole industry of folks that benefit from that, right? You sort of have the social media engines that benefit from that, because then we get our likes and our shares and our clicks.
Yeah.
And then you also get news media, same thing. They're looking for clicks and views. And then you also get politicians and other types of players that benefit from this kind of thing. If they can simplify the story to the other side is evil, so I'm just going to keep telling you about the outrageous things they do,
Right.
so you're mad at them all the time, then I don't really have to do as much work. Like, my job gets easier. You're not really voting for me, you're voting against my opponent. So that makes my life a little easier. So politicians benefit from this, to just as a distraction factor and just as a fundraising tool. So there's a bunch of players that, and then our emotions are against us, right? Our normal human emotions, our innate kind of our natural way of being, is hard to overcome, because you have to kind of engage the more frontal part of your brain and take a step back a little bit, and not just instantly react to this information. And it's hard for us. So there's a lot of things going against us in this, and a lot of people benefiting from it.
Right. But I read, I've done my research coming to you, right? And I read.
I really appreciate that, by the way, because a lot of shows don't.
Oh, okay, cool. Right? How toxic it can be, and why is it toxic? I'm not sure of your thoughts on this, but in terms of the demonization, people may demonize those who make mistakes, and it speaks to other things, especially as it relates to avoidance of this dialogue. In other words, people tend not to communicate, because of this outrage, this outburst, I'd like to say, right, and the resistance that may happen there. What are your thoughts on the toxicity of this outrage culture?
Yeah, I mean, that's probably the biggest thing that's really increased over my lifetime, is the animosity towards people with different views. That it especially in America, but I think you're seeing this around the world as well. That it's just, we don't talk about issues very much. We don't talk about the marginal tax rates and have fights over that. We're just fighting over whether they're wearing the right color T-shirt or the right color hat, or they're in favor of certain things that we kind of identify with. And if they don't agree with us on these certain issues, they're not only somebody that disagrees with us, but like, they're evil people. They're like bad. They're morally bad. And that's probably a big shift. And that's really destroyed dialogue, because once you've sort of decided somebody's evil, where do you go from there, right? That you can't really negotiate with evil. So I think this is where we have gotten to the point where we just throw everybody in this evil bucket,
right?
And we just have this stereotype of people on the other side, whoever that might be for you, and we throw everybody into this. They're evil because they identify as that side, so therefore they must also subscribe to all these policies, and that makes them evil. So it has totally destroyed a functioning democracy, basically, which requires us to work with people we don't necessarily agree with, and to try to find compromise when we can, and live alongside each other when we can't, even when we can't find compromise. And I think this is where we have made that unacceptable. Everything is like a line we can't cross.
It's interesting that you say that, though, because when you look at how we deal with each other, we take things personal. Why can't we look at an individual as an individual, and not on as it relates to the act that individual, or the clothes for that matter, that individual wear? Look at a police or military personnel, not as a part of the security force, but as an individual. Do you understand?
Yeah, 100%. And I think a lot of it comes down to our psychology, and that we're have busy lives. And, if you do that, it's more work, right? I have to now accept that nuance and understand things a little bit more. And also, it also might make me uncomfortable, because maybe those stereotypes I have, if you look at them as an individual, you might find those stereotypes go, oh, I was kind of wrong about that, right? So then now I'm suddenly uncomfortable, because my stereotypes weren't quite right. My certainty wasn't there. My certainty, which allows me to be outraged, is kind of breaking down. So there's that factor that we kind
Yeah.
of like it. We like this
Right.
simple binary black and white world look at the world because it
Yeah.
simplifies our
Yeah.
lives. So we kind of like it, but then also we have been fed this by all these sort of
Yeah.
instigators that
Yeah.
also benefit from it. So it's a mutually detrimental
Right.
cycle where we feed
Right.
off each other, where some of it's our own psychology that does it, and then we're
Mhm.
also being fed it by people that have kind of bad
Yeah.
intentions.
Yeah. You're listening to Can Youth Exploration, your topic in the podcast. I'm talking to David. We're looking at outrage culture. David, I alluded to something earlier. How cancer culture relates to outrage culture.
Yeah, there's definitely a tie in there where, again, it kind of comes back to this idea of sort of this moral outrage and outrage. Science, psychologists, social psychologists, others suggest that the idea of outrage, the emotion of outrage, came about to enforce norms because we're a social species, and to survive, we sort of traded muscles for brain power, and so we really have to in order to survive, we had to work together. But then that
Right.
introduced new dangers, and we could now maybe we've overcome a lion, but now we have to worry about other people, right? They might be our enemies
Right.
now, and who might kill us. So it's a lot of it is fear and harm based, and so that's where outrage came from, is this idea that this would help us enforce norms. So if somebody
Yeah.
behaved, we had all these norms, and that would kind of protect the group because we needed to be in the group to survive. And
Yeah.
and because of that, if you violate those norms, you risk being ostracized from the group. And that's very important to our psychology as well, because we still have that 100,000-year-old brain in there
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
sees being ostracized from the group as basically a death sentence, right? And so
Yeah.
we're very afraid of that. We don't even really realize it all the time, but
Yeah.
and so outrage, you could say that cancel culture sort
Yeah.
of grows out of that, right? Like it's this
Oh yeah,
tool
that's what I'm thinking. Yeah.
to enforce these norms, but sometimes it gets carried away, right? I mean, it can really stifle conversation because if you have a slightly dissenting voice, a lot of times we're talking about how, the other side is the problem here, the other side's the problem there. But we often don't question our own side enough. And part of that is because, we're afraid of the consequences of that. If we
Right.
wait, our side is doing this thing and I don't completely agree with. And if you say that, then all of a sudden, well, wait, you're a bad guy now. You can't be in the group anymore, kind of
Right.
thing, right? And so that's kind of where this cancel culture can come in,
Yeah.
is that's almost like a mob mentality where this
Yeah.
kind of enforcing the norms has gone, it's like a cancer. It's like gone on steroids.
Yeah.
It's just enforcing norms that to a too large to it, like this cancerous degree. It's like out of control.
Mhm.
And so,
Mhm.
yeah, there's definitely a close relationship there.
I
And
realize that.
yeah.
Look, it's really interesting how you explain outrage culture to us. For many people, it's a new term, and and they will learn about it here and Can Youth Exploration being explained by you, David. But look, what are some of the most hopeful, trend that you've seen in the way people are responding to outrage culture, because they're responding.
Yeah, I mean, I've talked to a lot of people that have been in this kind of as you said, the language is still kind of developing. A lot of this is not
Right.
really out there in society that much, but you sort of this bridge building. Some people talk about bridge building,
Yeah.
some people talk about depolarization, and there's
Yeah.
lots of people working in this space. So that's one of the hopeful things, is there's lots of people that recognize this as a major problem and that we're looking at it. On the other hand, I talk to a lot of those folks, and it can be a little bit of a depressing space because you don't always win, right? Conflict is
Yeah.
hard. Conflict is
Definitely.
complicated. There's not always simple answers to it. So that can create some challenges for staying in this fight because you feel like you're not getting anywhere. So we have a lot of things going against us. Our own psychology, like I say, all these people that benefit from it. So there's all these reasons people do it, and it's hard to undo those two things. But the amount of people working on this problem is a good thing. I also think you're seeing more and more people sort of falling into this idea of the Hidden Tribes group did a bunch of research on this and
Okay.
separated out people into groups and found that there's this, what they categorized as this kind of exhausted majority. So rather than just a blue, red, left, right spectrum, they sort of broke it, I think, 5 groups or something like that. And they found this kind of middle majority, which is I think about 2/3. They claim it's about 2/3 of the population that's sort of exhausted with the extreme rhetoric and the extreme tribalness, right? So that's a positive sign. If people are kind of upset with it and they're kind of like, I'm over it, then that's a good sign. Maybe we'll start to see change. But I will say at the same time, a lot of people that say they're over it or they're tired of it still participate in it. So it's hard.
The Lewin theory about unfreeze, change, and freeze again, and so on. So right there in the middle, there might be the change agents, right? And again, and I know what we are saying, and I guess some of my audience know. But those change agents, how much can the change agent basically succeed when there are two extremes that are, I'd want to say, rooted, grounded in what they do? Change agents in terms of politics, whatever, never usually succeed because of the rooted extremes on both sides that are there already.
Right. And I think it's a big issue. Another big challenge with this is the perception problem, right? I mean, I think when you actually, almost getting a little bit back to your first question about looking at individuals, when we have this perception that the extremes are bigger than they are because they dominate the online landscape, they dominate even in the news media because they're the outrageous ones. That's what everybody wants to show you. Like, no one wants to see the calm person just explaining things in a calm way. These loud voices get the attention. So we have a misperception that they're a larger group than they are. So I want to get that out first. And that contributes to the problem a little bit, that we think these extremes are much bigger than they are. And then that thing that you were saying about individuals, we sort of put a person in that group even though they probably don't belong there, because most of us aren't that. We know statistically that most of us aren't that extreme, right? So so that's where we kind of run into a problem too, with that we have this misperception that there's so many out there. So that's one thing that can be encouraging, that if we can overcome that a little bit and realize, as you said in the beginning, go talk to a real person and go learn about them. And you might find that they disagree with you on some stuff, but they're also like, oh, they have a family and they want their kids to do well, and they go to schools, and you'll find that they're regular people too.
That's the thing, and that's what I'm hoping to see in life right across the globe. We're people, we're individual first, right? But look, you're a podcaster like me, and what inspire you? I realize your podcast is Outrage Overload, I guess, right? Where that name comes from? What inspired you to use that name and to do the podcast?
Yeah, well, it was a lot going on in my life, and observing what was going on out there. So you kind of had, I launched the podcast in 2022. You had in 2016 you had the election, the presidential election here. That got a lot of people, that created a lot of polarization and animosity. People were pretty upset about that. You saw a lot of division and fighting. So that escalated division. And then you had the COVID pandemic and lockdowns and vaccinations, and a lot of people fighting over all those things. And that created a lot of families breaking apart. It seems like everybody has a story like this. Uncle so-and-so is not invited to Thanksgiving anymore, and this kind of stuff, right? Everybody has stories like that. I don't talk to my cousin anymore. I don't talk to my, something like that. Everybody had these kind of stories. And then, that was visible within my own life. I saw Facebook people, canceling people on Facebook or blocking them or whatever. And in real life too, like I say, I mean, they don't invite so-and-so to Thanksgiving anymore, stuff like that. They don't talk. These lifelong relationships being torn apart by this division, right? And so then all that was inspiration. And I think that's where the outrage overload comes out. Like, it's one thing to be outraged. Like I said, that is a tool. Like, outrage can have its positives. Like, we're outraged that this thing happened, so we're going to get together and we're going to go against it. You think of something, like some pharmaceutical company is doing something and we're going to get outraged about it and start a movement and we'll do something and we can see
Right.
positive results from that. But if you're just swimming in outrage, it stops having its ability to do that, right? Because I'm just mad about everything all the time. And, and it creates a lot of this, a lot of different names for it, but like this kind of virtue signaling kind of thing. So
Right.
it's not real activism. I'm just like posting something on Facebook. Well, my little post, I can post on Facebook 100 times a day. Nothing in the world is going to change, right? And I'm not really going to feel better. I might feel better for a brief instant if I get my little boost of my various neurotransmitter juice, but it's not going to last. It has no lasting positive impact. And it's not going to really do anything. No one's going to, if I say every day minimum wage should be $25 an hour, every day I post that, what's going to change? Nothing's going to change, right? No one's going to do anything. So it's created a lot of that. And that's where the outrage overload comes in. I'm just swimming in it, right? It's everywhere. And I don't even know what to be outraged about anymore because I'm outraged all the time. So that's kind of where the name comes from.
I know. I'd written a book called Oriental Ghost. You can find it on Amazon. It's about documenting that period of time when we have the pandemic, and I wrote about the outrage and all of that. So yes, indeed, I understand what you're saying. Can Youth Exploration started around about that time as well. We have been going since. Comes out of the outrage, so to speak. But David, it's interesting though that you have said those things, because what I'd like to talk to you about now is perhaps some solution, right? What are some of the most important things you have learned about outrage culture since you have started? And I know that you'll dabble into some solution there. I've been learned some stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I think some of the biggest things I've learned is that these are, deep psychological parts of our psychology, and they're very strong and powerful, and it requires, a real effort. Like it doesn't come naturally to not fall into this and not be part of it and not basically be part of the problem. So it really requires us to be sort of unnatural a little bit, right? Because being more reflective, taking a step back, asking questions like, do I have the whole story? Those aren't natural things to do. Our natural tendency is to get mad right away, react to it, and respond. So that's one big thing, is that these are deep psychological things that we can, but we also have ways, we are smart people, and we have brains, and we have control over our actions. So, that's a lot of it is building that resilience to it a little bit, recognizing it. Right. That's another big thing. Is I think, there's people talk about mindfulness. So you can be mindful of the people that are manipulating you, whether it's social media, whether it's politicians, whether it's the news media, and look into that and think about it. Like, does that headline, I'm mad at that headline. Well, that maybe being mad about it right there should be your signal to say, let's step back and see what's really being said. And is there more to this story? And I think that's probably one of the most important aspects of being more resilient to all this, is recognizing people are trying to do this to us. And the trigger itself of being mad is probably the wake-up call to say there's probably more to this story.
Yes, definitely. I read something in your website, I guess, and so on. It said that every day we are bombarded with outrageous and material used to evoke anger and so on. But look, scam likely calls. Wow, that's something else. Many of us, we would get these calls, 10, 15 of these calls within 1 hour. David, talk to me about your quote there, what you have said, and how it relates to those calls. You know them.
Well, and that's there is a lot of parallel between sort of fishy sales tactics and the kind of stuff going on in the outrage world of politics and social media and those kind of things too, right? There's a lot of overlap there with a lot of the same kind of psychological tricks being played. They try to get you scared. They try to trigger your emotions first. Once our emotions are triggered, then we talk about the fast and slow parts of our brain. where the fast parts are kind of these quick reactions that we had to develop to survive, right? Like you're going to react to things that are unusual. You're going to react to things that are different. You're going to react, and that translates to sort of things that might be scary, and you're going to react to that. And the slower part of your brain, which is that more thinking part of your brain, sort of gets overwhelmed by that fast acting response, reactionary part of your brain. And so that's where these scam likely calls can really work, right? Oh, my son's trapped in, Italy somewhere, and I need to send him money right away, right? Like, and so your thinking brain shuts off because you're so caught up in that emotion.
Yeah, interesting. But still looking at solutions, because we want to be solution based as well. What advice would you give to someone who is struggling to cope with outrage in their own life? That is.
We focus a lot on this on the show. I always try to spend time on this with every guest. Not every guest. Sometimes, like some of the scientists kind of only have the bad news, like they don't have that many solutions. But that's something we really focus on a lot. And and some of this seems like it might feel like just some platitudes, right? But some of it does come down to some basic stuff. Like some of it is being more mindful, right, in your life, and particularly to this kind of exposure, this kind of media. Some of it is getting better sleep, right? You could just you can cope with this stuff better if you just work on sleep habits. And some of it is then once in a while, maybe it's time to take a break from social media. If this stuff is making you mad, maybe take a break from it. Focus on the stuff that helps you move along in the path you wanted to move in. And again, it sometimes feels like platitudes, but like we often don't ask ourselves these really hard questions. And these hard questions are what can really center us on these kind of problems, because understand who you are, what do you care about, who do you want to be, what are my objectives and goals. Like focus on that stuff. Understand that, get a good picture of that, and that'll make it much easier to ground you in these other things. Like, what path do I want to be on? Is this thing I'm fighting about with somebody on Facebook, is that fight helping me along that path? And if not, do less of that. Like go to the things that help you move along that path. And so again, that's, you could just say that's another little version of mindfulness, but a lot of that stuff comes into play in terms of, another aspect of this is, getting a little bit realistic about where you can help. And it, kind of comes down, you could say things like, the old saying about put your oxygen mask on first. So there's also that, making sure I can't go help a lot of other people if I'm not, able to do anything for myself. And another aspect of it is where will my efforts have impact, right? And so then, and so maybe that is focusing more locally, right? Like maybe you can't change the world, maybe you can't change, your country, but you might have impact locally. I mean, maybe there's a food drive, maybe there's some other topic that you are interested in. Maybe you have a position on a issue that you can work on locally. Maybe it's serving on the school board. Maybe it's working for a candidate locally. Maybe it's, something like that. You can have a lot more impact locally, and you can focus on those efforts. Like I often people get so overwhelmed by the national picture because we've had media consolidation. So we're just showing these national issues all the time. We don't have as much local news as we used to have. So we're not even aware of a lot of stuff that might be going on in our communities, but we get focused on these national issues. We probably can't do very much, right? I may not be able to do that much on some of these big national stage issues. I can donate to some causes. Okay, that's something I can do. But individually, I probably not have that much influence on it. But I can work maybe more locally. I can work. I can also just realize I am putting in the effort. So it's a contrast between, falling into nihilism is something you can do, right? Where you sort of say, well, nothing's going to change, so I won't do anything. But that comes back to the who do you want to be thing. And can you live with yourself if you don't try, right? So that's another way to think about it is, do something like, and maybe that action is nothing more than taking care of your family and kids. And I say nothing more as though that's a small thing, but if you're raising your kids, and that's the next generation, right? And so you're doing something. If that's all you're doing, quote unquote, you're doing something. Don't forget that.
So you're thinking about channeling your energy into something positive that will sort of calm you as well.
Right.
Yeah.
And be aware of those efforts, because sometimes we fail to acknowledge the effort. Like putting in the effort means you did something, even if maybe it didn't achieve the instant result you wanted. Like if you can focus on that effort and not get so fixated on this larger big picture outcome. Like we don't always get what we want. That's the reality of life, right?
you said that, and it's interesting that you have said that, because the effort is still important, and we should basically congratulate ourselves on the effort, even if we have not succeeded as it relates to the outcome.
Right. Especially this maybe the biggest, we probably made some push along towards that outcome,
Yeah.
but maybe
Fair.
we didn't get the big picture. Maybe we didn't
Yeah.
change the world in some big way, but we did put that effort in, and you're right. We have to give ourselves credit for that.
Yeah, pat on the back for that. And interested. And you're listening to Can Youth Exploration, your topic in the podcast. I am Dr. White, Can Youth White, and I'm talking to David. Very interesting observations and opinions David have here. But look, David, how can we teach people about some of the things that you have alluded to? How can we teach them? I'm not sure if in your business you're actually teaching people to do better, to respond positively to outrage culture.
Yeah, I mean, certainly we try. It's a big aspect of the show. I try not to turn into a lecture show. So I try to bring,
Right.
information from experts in a way that's approachable and accessible, I guess I should say, to
Okay.
a larger audience. You don't have to be a science geek, or we're not going to go down into a lot of the math, but,
Right.
so we try to bring it in a more approachable way, a more accessible way. But so I don't want to think that we're just doing lectures over here, because I try to make
Okay,
it more
fine.
entertaining than just lectures.
Great.
But yeah, between the lines, we obviously want to get people more informed about this stuff, and we do believe, and I do believe that understanding it better, and certainly in my case, having
Yeah.
an education, I'm taking listeners along a journey where we're learning together,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
I didn't start off as an expert on this. We're going to go understand it together and learn every day. Every episode, we learn something new, and we learn a little bit more about all this. And understanding a lot of what this is going on really has, for me personally, has added resilience. And I know to a lot of this, and better coping with it, and fitting it in my life, and still having it align with my my personality and what I want to do. And so I have heard that same kind of feedback from listeners, right? I mean, listeners are frustrated a lot of time. They want more. They want quick solutions, like that kind of thing. But I do get feedback from listeners about that same kind of thing, and I think that's really one of the main reasons I keep going, is because listeners have expressed that they really appreciate what we're trying to do here, and it's
Right.
helped them.
Yeah. I hear you, David. But when we look at organizations, right, we must realize that most of us spend most of our time within the framework of an organization, right? And that's where a lot of outrage takes place, right? How do managers, organizational leaders approach the culture of outrageness, so to speak, within the organization? Should they just leave it alone? How should they approach it? The presentism is the workers are there, but just not being productive, perhaps because of some passive anger. I've said a mouthful. Give me your views on it.
Yeah, I mean, that brings it into a wider societal, sort of impact, and that definitely is happening. And I am going to expand more beyond sort of just the politics of it, to talk about this kind of thing more, because it's definitely out there. And you're also seeing generational things too, right? Where there's shifts to expectations, and the kind of dynamics that different generations are looking for in a workplace and in organizations. And these are really complicated dynamics that are shifting around, and these are complex for managers to deal with. And I certainly don't have all the answers, for sure, but I could definitely see that there's a lot of parallels to a lot of the things we've covered in the last couple of years on the show that would then translate to an organization. And I certainly know from listener feedback that people talk about that some of their workplaces are almost little micro ecosystems of the same of these larger societal dynamics. So yeah, I think a manager is challenged by all this, because then you've also got, and I think this also is a there's a power dynamic there too, right? So if you're in a company where management has strong political issues, now you've got this whole other dynamic going on where you've got a different kind of cancel culture almost, right?
Yeah.
You've got
Yeah.
different kind of norms being enforced where like, oh, the manager is, devout Christian and believes these 7 things, and you're going to say this, you can't say that at work, right? So,
Right.
or vice versa, whatever their positions might be. And so that can be a challenge too, because now you've got a weird power dynamic that can really be stressful for people who, again, maybe don't align with those same ideologies as their management. So that can create a whole new power dynamic. And
Oh yeah.
How does the manager sort of stay out of that and that kind of thing? These are big
I know.
challenges.
Yeah, it can be touchy as it relates to outrage culture within the workplace. Sometimes it's exerted by management itself, and sometimes the other way around, and among workers as well. And it's a matter of looking at conflict management and so on, and the whole stuff there. But this whole outrage culture thing. It's important, David, and I'm happy that you are able to, teach it, talk about it on your podcast, and my audience now get a feel of what it's like, so to speak. I shouldn't say a feel of what it's like because think that we are being outraged, so to speak, on them. But they understand now what outrage culture is all about, and what to look for, and how to identify the sort of situation that they may find themselves in as a part of the outrage culture portfolio. I want to find out where my listener can find you and your social media handles.
Yeah, so you can find all of the stuff about the show at the website outrageoverload.net. Sometimes people think I'm saying outrage overlord, but that's a different thing. So this is
Okay. So it's overload, people. Those of you who are listening on your favorite podcast platform, audio. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, so outrageoverload.net, and that's also where I have a whole contact page on there that has everything. But my social media, you can find the show is at Outrage Overload on Instagram and Twitter and Blue Sky. And we have a Facebook page, Outrage Overload, as well. And you can reach out to me directly at Instagram as Mr. Blog, but it's probably easier to reach out to the show at Outrage Overload. And those are the best ways to reach out to me. You can email me, outrageoverload@gmail.com as well. I'm always open to conversation. As a podcaster, we love to hear.
Right?
We love to hear from listeners. Any feedback is always good.
That's what we do. But I went on your website and I actually subscribed. So my listeners can subscribe to what? Newsletter, I guess. That's what I've subscribed to.
Yeah, I'm putting out, periodically. Some of them are just kind of announcements and some rough updates, but then I'll also put out more, in-depth commentary and analysis periodically as well.
Yeah, interesting. Thanks for coming on Can Youth Exploration, your topic in a podcast. It was nice talking to you, David.
It was very, very nice talking to you, Dr. White.
So that was David, and outrage culture, guys. It's new to many of us, and the whole concept and the essence of the concept. It's new, and David has actually outlined and defined this thing in a detailed manner. And I want you to check David's website out, right? See what he has there and how you can get involved and communicate with him. And let us deal with this outrage culture thing now. It doesn't make sense in our society, the toxicity that it brings. Please. Okay, catch you. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Can Youth Exploration, your topic in the podcast. Goodbye.